Thank you, MC. Good evening. And a special good evening to our host, Mama Kwambana and Dad, and our guests tonight. I won't take too much of your time. I have a prepared presentation, and I have sent out some flyers. Hope you've got something on your table. So I'll just run through that. I'm very mindful that tonight is actually the carers' night. So whilst I want to address recent immigration developments that affect service providers, I also have my mind a lot more on the carers. So I will try and walk that tightrope. The first thing that you will notice there on my slide says that the healthcare visa was introduced in August 2020, and exactly 5 years ago. And the first cohort will qualify for indefinite leave to remain this August of 2025. So that's the first cohort. So I just want us to be mindful that we are coming to perhaps the first anniversary really of the first cohort qualifying for indefinite leave to remain. And I want to mention that for two reasons. Number one, and I want to just take up on what the previous speaker was talking about in terms of training and so on. Now, I suspect that what will happen when a lot of the carers that will get indefinite leave to remain in August 2025 will depend a lot on what happens at their workplaces. No, so we are talking about whether they will continue to work as carers for their employers or they will move on. And I think that's a real issue for a lot of you service providers, whether you will be able to retain your staff beyond their 5 years. Will they stay? Will they go to university? What will happen? Will there be a deficit? Will there be a need for more carers? And the second point, and why I mention this, is because we know that there is now a restriction on carers coming to the United Kingdom on a number of fronts. The government has restricted very severely the issuing of COS. And I liked your plea to the mayor, because part of that, I'm sure you are familiar with this experience of service providers applying for COS and the Home Office saying we need supporting documents from councils to say that you have the work, because they are not giving them as freely as they used to. So that's a very real and live issue. But on my second slide, I have something that's been happening quite a lot, and this is to do with the shareholding structure or the shareholder structure of the companies. Now, a lot of you that are service providers may not be aware of this. If you change shareholding of your company, you haven't introduced anyone from outside, perhaps amongst the existing shareholders, and you restructure the shareholding, that can trigger a compliance letter from the Home Office. In fact, I think, let me rephrase that. That will trigger a compliance letter from the Home Office. So increasingly we are seeing the Home Office writing to service providers and saying, you have transferred 5% of your shareholding to Director B or Shareholder C, and that in itself will lead to the loss of a sponsor license. I don't know if you were aware of this, but this is something that you have to seriously think about. Don't do it willy-nilly. It's not a small issue. It's actually happening quite a lot. And some of you may have played around with the shareholding and you haven't received any letter or communication from the Home Office. I want you to think about that. Perhaps reversing or look at the other option, which is actually applying for a new sponsor license. So it's a very serious issue, because the loss of your sponsor license obviously has an impact on how you do business. Okay, then let me go to the third issue, and this is to do with the loss of a sponsor license. Now, I think a lot of you service providers will agree with me that a sponsor license has or changes the way that you run your business. It's a game changer, basically. It leads to ease of hiring of staff, retaining staff, and so on. And the loss of a sponsor license is devastating. It can actually destroy a business overnight. So what you want to be mindful of is compliance, keeping your sponsor license, protecting it, and making sure that the people that are responsible for managing it are well trained. Now, if, God forbid, you lose your sponsor license, there's a process called judicial review that you must immediately think about, because if you lose your sponsor license, there's no appeal, there's no process of appealing it. So the only option that's open to you is something called judicial review, which is a very expensive process of challenging the loss of a sponsor license. But the good thing is that if you engage in that process, if you start judicial review, it keeps your sponsor license live, okay? So for as long as the judicial review process is ongoing, you are able to retain your staff. If you don't do judicial review and you have had your sponsor license revoked, you immediately, and underline that word, immediately lose the right to employ migrant staff. So from that moment that you have lost your sponsor license, you cannot have sponsored workers. So very, very important to understand. Now, as part of that, that presentation, I wanted to know something about business contingent planning. I don't know if as service providers you have this document called a business contingent planning. Now, it hasn't been a requirement from the Home Office point of view, but increasingly local councils are demanding that you must have a business contingent plan. And part of your business contingent plan must include the loss of a sponsor license. What will you do if you lose a sponsor license? And part of that must be an understanding that the process of challenging the loss of a sponsor license takes a long time and can keep you going. So that must be part of your business contingent plan. Okay? Then I want to speak directly to carers on the second point, which is to do with fee waivers. Now, if your sponsor or your employer loses their sponsor license, the next process that happens is the receipt of a 60 days letter. I'm sure you've heard of this. So a letter comes from the Home Office that says you now have 60 days within which you must find an alternative employer. If you fail to do that, then you must leave the United Kingdom. Okay? Now, there's been a change to that policy, or rather there's going to be a change with effect from the 9th of April. And that change is that the Home Office are going to do away with the 60-day letter. If your employer loses their sponsor license, the new policy or the new system will be that you immediately go into a regional hub where regional hubs or regional councils will then try and allocate you to a new employer. Okay, so the 60-day letter is going to be phased out in favor of this process where you go into a hub and where they will then try and allocate you to an employer. So it's a very important and positive development. Then let me talk very briefly about supplementary work. Now, if you are working as a carer, you have the right to work as many hours as you want for that particular employer. Okay? There's no limitation. There's a minimum number of hours that you must have or that you must receive from your employer. But beyond that, you can work for as many hours as you want or as you wish. But let's say that that employer doesn't have sufficient hours. You are allowed to do what is called supplementary work for an alternative employer or for another employer. And the maximum number of hours that you can do is 20 hours per week. Okay? So you can only do 20 hours per week for another employer. But the key thing is that supplementary work must not interfere with the main work. So you must still do the full hours for your main employer, and then you can do your supplementary hours. Okay? Then I think I've touched on this change that's coming, which is about regional hubs for displaced workers. So let me go to the next one. And someone touched on this, I think our accountant. This is the new salaries that are coming after the 9th of April. So here are the two figures to remember. £12.82 is the minimum wage for carers employed after 9 April. Okay? So if you engage a carer after the 9th of April, the minimum wage is £12.82. Okay. But here's the interesting thing. If you have an existing carer coming to the end of their visa, you know ordinarily they have 3-year visas or 2-year visas, and then you extend. So if they come to the end of their current visa and they are renewing their visa, the new minimum kicks in as well. Okay? Now, the existing workers, the ones that you already have, those are the ones that are going up to the other figure, which is £12 and 21. Okay? So the ones that are currently working for you, they are all going up to £12.21 with effect from 9 April 2025. It's very important to get this. But speaking to a lot of my clients here, service providers and so on, how many genuinely believe that you can distinguish? It's not practical. Yeah? Is it? I actually don't think it's practical. I don't think you can have two classes of workers and look at it this way. Can you genuinely have someone joining a company now on a higher hourly rate than those people that have always been working for you? Yeah? So I personally think that everyone is going to go to £12.82. So if you are a carer and sitting here tonight, this is excellent news for you. Personal opinion. I think legally speaking you can do it, but practically speaking you are going to struggle to have two classes. You know, a lot of people think that you can have people keep their salaries confidential. It's not possible. People share this information. So I wanted to have a Q&A after, but yes, you can shoot your hand up. Yes. I fully understand that. Now, okay, what's going to happen obviously is when these new salaries kick in, the local councils have an obligation to also raise their hourly rates. They have already done that. So
because this is why I was pleading, because the percentages that the local councils are increasing by doesn't even cover that 1282, especially if we take into consideration things like holiday pay and mileage, and also the costs of the administrative costs, all our overheads. It's not covering that because in some cases, some local authorities are not even increasing even a single percentage. So it's ranging between 0% to, I would say, 5 to 6% with some local authorities. And taking into consideration, because also the NI is going up, it's going to be a struggle. And honestly speaking, as employers, we are actually going to stop employing because we can't afford it.
I hear you. I wish I was set on the other side as government or local council, but they are here, and perhaps we'll hear their their response. But these are mandatory minimums, and we cannot wriggle out of them. And it's important that we just learn to navigate. If you can get away with a staff where you have the two classes, some earning the lesser and some earning the higher, then fantastic, but good luck. I think you're gonna need it. Then let me just talk very briefly to carers on something called the 60-day letter that I mentioned earlier. If you receive a 60-day letter currently as the law stands, you must not travel. I cannot understand why people want to travel around those periods. The moment you get a 60-day letter, stay put. Because if you leave the UK, your visa or your right to remain in the UK immediately lapses. So very important that you stay put. Then let me move on to deception. And this is very important, especially for carers. The Home Office are increasing surveillance on the use of fake documents. And there's a lot of that happening. So whether people bringing in dependents using false birth certificates, and by the way, and this is the sad part, the Home Office define fake documents to include documents that have been tampered with. So sometimes you get an official document, genuine document, and then people want to maybe make the lettering more legible, you know, because maybe it's faint. The Home Office take that as fake, deceptive or altering a document. So you must never attempt to do that. But here is the even said a part of it. The Home Office are digging and going back. So let's say you've come to the UK, you've been in the UK for 4 or 5 years, and then you are at the point of applying for indefinite leave to remain, and these things then come up. At that point, it kicks in. And as you know, once they find out that you've used a false document or you've tampered with the document, it's an automatic ban, okay? And the other thing that happens quite a lot is people using photoshopped documents. So say, for instance, you want to bring a partner from abroad, you are genuinely in a relationship, but perhaps you don't have as many photographs of you together, and then you want to marry your picture and his picture, to just increase the quantity of photographs that they take as using false documents. So just be careful around those documents. Then I think my last slide is on dependents. Do dependents of skilled workers qualify for indefinite leave to remain on domestic violence grounds? So this happens quite a lot. Domestic violence happens sometimes, and there is a visa called domestic violence concession. So essentially the way it works is that if you can prove that there was domestic violence, and domestic violence is defined very broadly to include even coercive behavior. So if a spouse, for instance, is controlling your salary and things like that, that is considered as domestic violence. And you can apply for this concession. The Home Office will give you 3 months leave, beyond which you can then apply for another visa, not indefinite leave to remain, but another visa. Those were my prepared remarks, but I'm mindful as always that there may be some questions, so I will entertain perhaps 2 or 3 questions, and then I will cede the floor to the MC. Any questions?
Questions? Carers?
Any questions from carers? Or not? Okay, fantastic. Mr. MC, over to you.